Tonight, the hurricanes from hell. They left behind victims.
We had no electricity, we had no water, there was nothing.
Brought villains.
You got to remember now, these crooks are sharp.
That was a bad decision.
Renewed faith and rebuilding without waiting for help from the government.
Not rebuilt, but rebuilt better.
All tonight on Dan Rather Reports. Good evening. For most of us, when we think of the hurricane season of 2005, we think of this place, New Orleans' lower Ninth Ward, the spot where nature's fury met man's faulty levees with tragic results. The world watched in horror as entire families were left clinging to their rooftops by a government response that was too little, too late. Over 1,800 people perished. Bodies are still being found, and many who survived escaped with nothing but their lives. They are struggling to rebuild in places where there is nothing left with which to rebuild. It's more than a year later now. The floodwaters have long ago receded, and so has the nation's attention. But for the people down here, time stands still. They escaped the wind and the water, only to find that the storms were inescapable after all. Mounds of debris still dot the landscape here, and lonely concrete slabs are often all that's left of a once proud family home. And yet, amid this destruction of almost biblical proportions, you can hear the sounds of hammers, the sounds of people determined to get their lives back. You can see the resolve in public officials' eyes as they seek to rebuild people's faith in the government that let them down in the midst and aftermath of the storms. You can hear it in the preacher's call of, "Let us arise and rebuild," to motivate his flock that has dared to come back. It's Sunday morning in Phoenix, Louisiana, a predominantly African-American community about 30 miles southeast of New Orleans. And just like they've done for almost a century here, people are making their way to Sunday service. Looking around this simple country church, hearing the voices singing their praises to God, and seeing the smiles on the faces, it's easy to forget no one's life here was left unscathed by the hurricane's rage.
People's lives have been destroyed. People still hurting as a result of not being able to be in their houses.
They believe in God.
Reverend Tyrone Edwards is minister of this church, just like his grandfather and uncle were decades before him. He's also a lifelong resident of Phoenix.
Have you ever in your life seen anything like what happened in the wake of Katrina and Rita?
Never. It just blew my mind because there was no houses, anything. Houses on top of the levee was turned upside down. It was just horrible.
Was there anything in this whole area untouched by Katrina and Rita?
Nothing. Nothing was untouched.
But the spotlight was on New Orleans, where the cameras were there to capture the chaos as the masses of people pleaded for help that was slow in coming. So, although Phoenix was underwater too, Reverend Edwards says after seeing New Orleans on TV, he knew that his small town of around 400 people would have to rely on its own strength, not the government, to get it up and running.
Somewhere in the back of your mind or down in your heart did you think, well, we have to do for ourselves, but we are going to get some help. We are going to get some federal government help, some state help.
Didn't think about that because when I saw the convention center and New Orleans Superdome, then I knew we can expect no help from our government because the world saw that New Orleans looked like a third world country. So I knew when we came back here that we had to fend for ourselves because we couldn't expect this government to do anything for us.
And for weeks, the situation in Phoenix looked hopeless. Not only were all of the homes, churches, and stores gone, but not even the dead were spared. But all this was underwater.
All this was underwater. These tombs, some of them was turned upside down. It was up in the air.
Right.
Coffins was all over the place. Bodies was all over the place.
The only signs of life were the displaced cattle that roamed the street. Until one day, Reverend Edwards had a revelation.
I kept coming down here every day, and I saw the instruction, no movement. And so the Spirit told me that day, you got to go back home and do some work.
Did you ever think about not worth it, not worth coming back, not worth rebuilding?
The thought of never coming back never entered my mind. Matter of fact, I couldn't wait to come back.
Reverend Edwards wasn't the only one who wanted to get back. Oliver Bartholomew and his wife Aileen were two of the first to return after living in temporary housing for almost 2 months.
On the 18th of October, we bought a boat, a motor, a tent, and we decided to come home. And we've been here ever since.
They were the lucky ones. They still had a structure left. Out of 160 houses in town, only 25 were even salvageable.
A lot of people didn't have anything left. They didn't even have a piece of wood from their home that they could recognize. It was completely gone. So we were very fortunate, at least felt very fortunate, to have ours still standing.
But the storm had made their home completely uninhabitable. So the couple, recently married, did what people who live in Phoenix do. They made do with what they had.
We had a honeymoon cruise set up for the Thanksgiving week in November, and that was washed away. So we decided to have our honeymoon in a tent. Crawl in, comfortable as can be. Never a worry in the world.
So by day, they worked to rebuild their home, and at night, they camped out under the stars. And unlike their neighbors in the city, they never had to worry about where their next meal was coming from.
There's food all over in these woods. We don't have to be in the supermarket every day, and you don't get it as fresh as we get it here. There's no place like this. To us, this is paradise.
Reverend, explain this. How is it different? What makes it different here from the urban areas that were hit with the storm that we see so predominantly displayed on television?
I think one of the things that's different here in this little rural community, we didn't sit back and wait on the government. I think what happened in the urban area, people sitting back waiting on the government programs, and so most people haven't started rebuilding because they're still waiting for the cavalry to come in.
Well, has the cavalry come in, so to speak?
No.
Reverend Edwards' realization that Phoenix couldn't just wait for the cavalry to come springs not just from the stark images of New Orleans. It goes much further back in history. You see, this is not the first time I've been to Plaquemines Parish, the county where Phoenix is located. Back during the civil rights struggle in the early 60s, I came down to interview the then leader of this parish, a man named Judge Leander Perez, Sr., who was infamous in his day for his strong, iron-fisted support of segregation.
Well, isn't the tide of history running against you?
I cannot subscribe to the principle of surrender and the brainwashed technique of saying it's bound to happen, so what?
You know the history of this Plaquemine Parish with one of the best-known segregationists of his era, Leander Perez, ruled it like a king, like a Maharaja.
See, what you got to understand, white people was more enslaved in Plaquemine Parish than black people because we didn't get any money or anything from the parish. We always had to work for ourselves. We built our houses on our own. Everything we did was independent. We was like a separate village in itself.
And that built a tradition of self-reliance.
Correct.
With that history of self-reliance and overcoming struggle in mind, Reverend Edwards knew that Phoenix would survive. But he knew it needed a focal point, and that focal point became the church. Even though there were barely enough people to fill one pew, let alone a whole congregation.
You're preaching only to a handful of people, maybe not even a handful of people.
3 people.
Preaching to 3 people.
And I'm one of the 3.
Oh, I see, it's 3 including you.
Yes.
Well, did you have any sense, to use the hurricane metaphor, that you were just preaching into a wind tunnel? Only 2 other people hearing it.
Many times I would come to church and I would walk in and it'd just be the 3 of us. And the thought would come, just say a prayer and leave. But God would say, you got to preach.
But Reverend Edwards didn't just preach to his congregation. He went from New York to Washington State, spreading the word about Phoenix.
He's a man of very focused determination, wonderful sense of humor. He's an action man, though.
Benny and Brenda Puckett are missionaries who got Reverend Edwards' message.
And he's going to bring the people together to want them and motivate them. Yeah, we can do this. You know, God is on our side. We can do this.
So, with help from Benny, Brenda, and others, Reverend Edwards and his people first tackled rebuilding the church.
This one building represented to the community, it represented a piece of their community that could bring them back to some sort of spiritual life.
It also was a place to house the flood of volunteers who heeded Reverend Edwards' call. College kids, people from nonprofits like Common Ground and Oxfam, and, perhaps most importantly, folks from churches of all denominations started coming down.
The religious community stepped up and across denominational lines, across all barriers of that sort, they've come in and said, this is our job. We help people who need help.
And this historically segregated community became a veritable gumbo of races as the volunteers streamed in. Michael Gromer from Covenant World Relief was one of those volunteers.
I asked Tyrone, I said, Tyrone, how are the people going to respond to a bunch of white folks coming down here and helping them? And he says, they don't care. They love to have you. And that's exactly what we found.
You know, one time we had a volunteer working around here, and he had to do this rope in order to cut the tree down. And he had a noose that he created. And he was on it, and I'm looking at this white guy, all these white guys, you know, setting up this rope and all that. But I'm looking at a noose. And I say, you know, man, I got some serious problem watching white men with a rope. So, you know, Katrina was able to bring people to this community together. And we would say that in spite of our government neglect, the American people have responded to us in a mighty powerful way.
I think the thing that is hardest is just kind of getting your arms around the project as a whole and saying, how do we and how can we help these people, and not really do it for them, but partner with them.
What they've partnered on is a project to help the community move from temporary trailers into permanent homes. On a Monday night in October, the church was filled to overflowing as the people of Phoenix gathered with volunteers from around the country to figure out a plan to start building houses.
What's the best thing that's happened to you in the last month or week?
Is that we finally came with the blueprint to rebuilding out the homes in this community. We've been waiting on this night.
We've come up with two plans. One is approximately 1,200 square feet, and the other is a smaller home, about 900 square feet. Real simple, but a good, solid home.
The material that makes up that good, solid home will be paid for by the people of Phoenix. But Reverend Edwards has worked out a deal to get the labor donated.
We're looking at a year from now, having over 50 to 100 brand new homes rebuilt in this community. Not rebuilt, but rebuilt better.
On the day of our interview, more good news arrived. The permits came to start building that first new house. Over 14 months since that fateful day the storm came through.
Do you ever get weary? You must.
Not that, but I was always saying that I would like the time when I can just take off a whole month and spend it totally with my wife and son without doing anything.
Well, you know the words of the old hymn, the old gospel hymn that says, "Going to lay my sweet burdens down by the riverside."
That's not a good one, Dan, because that's one about dying. So that's not mine. Mine is this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine.
If another hurricane comes, what happens?
Well, I don't know, you know, people pose the question to us in a different way. They were saying, why are you rebuilding when you live in a hurricane area? We say because hurricane been coming every year since we've been living here. And next year's not going to be any different. I'm just looking at the good things that's happening right now. So I can't think about another hurricane because we're just thinking about rebuilding.
Coming up, a FEMA employee who went to prison for fraud.
We've got another search and rescue, 200's lost.
Like the hundreds of people who came to rebuild the little town of Phoenix, Louisiana, Andrew Rose knew he needed to get involved. From his home in Colorado, Rose, a retired attorney and volunteer firefighter, offered his services to FEMA, free of charge. To his surprise, the federal agency made him a paid employee, and 2 weeks later, he was in the heart of the disaster zone. It was unlike anything he'd ever experienced.
Within hours of us being there, it became readily apparent that despite assurances to the contrary, there was no food available, there was no water available, there was no communications available.
Rose's job was to turn this rundown New Orleans high school into a base camp for relief workers. The hours were brutal, 16 to 18 a day, 7 days a week, month after month. Over time, he says, the long days and the desperate conditions began taking their toll.
When you go out in the neighborhood, you can't help but see it and feel it. The smell of death and decay when we initially got there was all around you. What you saw on television didn't begin to compare with the 360-degree, all sensory perceptions just coming at you at one time. Over time, through lack of sleep, your mind just stops functioning the way it should, the way it normally would. And as a result, I did something that I am certainly sorry for and has had great repercussions.
What he did turned him overnight from a law-abiding citizen to a convicted criminal. He's an unlikely suspect, but according to federal prosecutors, Rose, a man with no previous criminal record, solicited a bribe from a food service contractor who was working at the base camp. In exchange for regular cash payments, Rose and a fellow FEMA employee, Lloyd Heileman, would inflate the camp's meal count, which would allow the contractor to bill the government, and therefore the taxpayers, more money. U.S. Attorney Jim Letton handled the case.
Andrew Rose and Lloyd Heileman said to him, "You will pay us $20,000, $10,000 each up front. You will also pay us $2,500 each per week thereafter. And we in turn are going to show you how to falsely inflate the number of $35 a head meals you serve and charge to FEMA."
With an entire American city in ruins, a $20,000 bribe hardly seems like a top priority for law enforcement. But official corruption, Letton says, had been destroying his city long before Katrina.
It cheats citizens of money, services, quality of life, and most importantly, the ability to trust their government. While Louisiana and while New Orleans may not have quantitatively, measurably more corruption than, say, other large cities, similarly situated cities, I can tell you that over generations, we've somehow managed to earn a reputation for being a lot more tolerant of it.
That reputation is well earned. Politicians trade their pinstripes for prison stripes on a fairly regular basis down here. So with the floodwaters receding and a deluge of relief money rushing in, federal officials realized that an extraordinary effort would be needed to keep that money safe. If the public and Congress ever thought they were throwing it into a sinkhole of corruption, they might not be so generous.
Can everyone hear me okay?
And this is the result. The Hurricane Katrina Fraud Task Force. It doesn't look like much, just a bunch of bureaucrats sitting around a conference room, but that's exactly the point. Dozens of government agencies have been forced to respond to Katrina. Agencies which haven't worked very well together in the past. But with a disaster of this magnitude, business as usual just won't do. David Dugas, the U.S. Attorney in Baton Rouge, is one of the task force's leaders.
The vast majority of the American people in response to a disaster respond by asking the question, how can I help? But then there's a certain element whose response is, how do I make a buck off of this? How do I profit?
Well, I have heard this is the largest disbursement of public funds ever to meet a disaster in this country. Is that true so far you know?
As far as I know, it is. The Department of Homeland Security Inspector General's office currently has calculated about $116 billion committed to the relief and recovery efforts, and I've seen some estimates as high as $200 billion.
Well, anytime you have a situation, first of all, where chaos, and even in this late date, near chaos in some areas, and you have hundreds of billions of dollars, or over $100 billion poured into it, to the average citizen, it says, whew, this is an ideal circumstance to get ripped off.
Can't disagree, and I think if you look at what we've done so far in terms of the investigations and prosecutions that we've done following Katrina, we've charged already over 400 individuals with hurricane-related fraud. Fraudulent charitable schemes, contractor fraud, procurement fraud, public corruption. There's nothing new in any of that. It's simply the opportunity is unprecedented. And so the scale is unprecedented, and it's requiring an unprecedented response.
More than 40 federal and state agencies are being coordinated through the task force's command center here in Baton Rouge.
In this corner over here are two of our analysts, two FBI analysts right back there.
Let's see, now these are Homeland Security people.
Homeland Security and HUD. And then going back this way, we have Health and Human Services and Department of Transportation desks, all hired since Katrina, specifically to work Katrina fraud.
Has anybody done this before?
I mean, we've had task forces and we've had command centers. I don't think we've ever had one that had the level of participation by this number of different agencies.
This big-time response has so far netted mostly small-time crooks. But Dugas says bigger, more complicated fraud cases take time, and that more indictments are coming. The task force has received nearly 9,000 tips from the public over the past year, including a call from that food service contractor at the FEMA base camp, alerting them that FEMA officials Holloman and Rose wanted payoffs. With so many agencies now working together, the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees FEMA, was immediately able to kick the investigation into high gear.
They were sitting across the desk at the task force from FBI. They then notify FBI because these individuals were contracted to work for the government. Seamlessly, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security, IG, mounted, I think, one of the most efficient, swiftest, and I guess one of the best undercover operations that I've seen.
On January 27, 2006, the food service contractor came here to the FEMA base camp and asked to see Holloman and Rose. The three men stepped outside and made small talk for a few minutes. Then the contractor handed to the FEMA employees 2 envelopes, each stuffed with $10,000 cash. Immediately, agents of the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security swooped in, handcuffing the 2 men and taking them to jail. Holloman and Rose had been caught red-handed.
We caught them red-handed because the system worked, because the task force concept worked, because the agencies, FBI and DHS, IG, worked well, worked swiftly, worked smart, worked together. Any violation of public trust by a public official or any violation of law by a citizen in the wake of Katrina is going to come with a very dear price to pay.
As a former attorney, Andrew Rose knew the price could be very high. Facing the prospect of up to 15 years behind bars, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 21 months in prison and a $20,000 fine.
I know it's hard on you too. I'm going to be away from my family for 21 months. I'm going to carry a record forever. I have 4 grandsons, age 6 and under. Do I want them to think of their grandfather as a criminal? No, of course not. Did I engage in criminal activity? Yes, I did.
But why? How did 2 men who came to New Orleans as rescuers wind up leaving as convicted felons? Lloyd Holloman, who also pleaded guilty, did not respond to our request for an interview, but Andrew Rose told us that he never intended to keep the money for himself. The plan, he says, was to put it towards repairing the school that housed his FEMA base camp.
This school was run down to an extent that it should have been condemned. Truly, it should have been condemned. Condemned and rebuilt. I felt a real need to make it a better place. I made a decision to accept that money. It doesn't matter why I accepted it. I made the decision to accept it. That was a bad, bad decision, and it will haunt me the rest of my life.
A few days before Thanksgiving, Andrew Rose became federal prisoner number 296-72034. And though he is the first FEMA employee to go to jail for Katrina-related fraud, he says his former employer doesn't seem to have heard the news.
I've received no less than 6, probably more than that, letters from FEMA since I pled guilty, saying, oh, you have to sign up for this training because if there's another hurricane or a natural disaster, we need you there. I could be employed by FEMA tomorrow without a doubt in my mind.
The Hurricane Fraud Task Force also works in conjunction with state agencies. We went on the rounds one day with 2 investigators, Carl Burke and Lloyd Hayden from the Louisiana State Licensing Board for Contractors.
How y'all?
Just fine, and yourself?
If you're a homeowner, then you're in a hurry to try to get back into what you call home, you know?
And that hurry makes people vulnerable. People like Freddie and Ramona Ross, who own one of the more than 200,000 homes in Louisiana alone, severely damaged by the hurricanes. The Rosses believe they have been victims of fraud, housing contractor fraud.
Katrina has come and gone, but there is a storm that we continue to fight every day in the process of rebuilding.
Today, the Rosses are providing information about a contractor they hired to redo their entire house after the storm. The Rosses say after they gave him the first check in April, he didn't do a thing.
I came to this house every day, nothing. He brought nothing, nothing was done. I mean, it was a robbery.
After a couple of weeks of calling, when the contractor finally showed up, Freddie says things got even worse.
So he knocked down the wall, but he didn't brace the ceiling, so the whole ceiling dropped. I mean, in the process of him fixing the house, he was causing more damage to the house than repairs.
Carl and Lloyd say it's not uncommon to find workers who don't know what they're doing.
We went to a house one day and they had a bunch of guys on the roof. We got to talking to them. Come to find out, one of them came from McDonald's, one of them was a chauffeur.
Yeah, they'd never been on a roof before.
Yeah. They said, we've never been on a roof before in our lives.
They were roofers.
Yeah, they were roofers.
Insurance money has funded much of the rebuilding going on today. But as more of the $8 billion of federal money designated solely for residential housing starts trickling in, the investigators believe the problems will only worsen. And with an entire region trying to rebuild at once, workers are coming in from all over. The state estimates that over 3/4 of them don't have the proper license to work.
Anywhere here along the Gulf Coast, you will find that these people are going back and forth, just following the storms.
It just so happened, on the day we followed the investigators around, that 2 contractors stopped us to find out how they could get their licenses in order to start working.
I already got an envelope for you.
And while the vast majority of contractors are honest, Carl and Lloyd's caseload has more than quadrupled, with reports of builders who just want to make a quick buck.
You got to remember now, these crooks are sharp. You know, we're not talking about your regular run-of-the-mill dummy, you know. These guys are smooth talkers.
Lloyd and Carl say the bad guys will say just about anything to get that initial job.
It's just unbelievable, the acting jobs they put on to get the job.
I had a lady the other day said he showed up with 2 Bibles in his hand.
That's the kind of stuff.
That's the kind of stuff these people got to put up with to live here.
Yeah.
Freddie and Ramona's home is still not complete, and they say they are out around $8,000, although their contractor denies any wrongdoing. But investigators Lloyd and Carl say the Rosses dispute is small compared to some they've seen. Case in point, this house on stilts, owned by a woman who can't even move in because the work was done so shoddily.
The contract, she said, was for $178,000, and she's giving him $81,000.
And he done left the country and done part of a job. So now there she is with a house that's raised up in the air, no money left to fix it. So, you know, I don't know what the lady's gonna do. Since he's been here, you've been pretty busy yourself getting it done. I think it's looking good.
In the Rosses' case, they got some help from a church group and did a lot of the work themselves. They'll likely never get the money back that they paid the contractor, although they'd like to see criminal charges brought against him. As for Carl and Lloyd, they continue to investigate cases of possible fraud and work long hours trying to make sure the builders they run into are licensed and qualified to do the job.
We need good, qualified contractors to come in and help us. The state needs help, but we need honest help. We don't need crooks.
Coming up next, rebuilding Louisiana's shattered shrimping industry. A fisherman's life can be a solitary one. Up before dawn, out on the water for days, struggling constantly against the forces of nature. It's no surprise that resilient souls like Ray Brandhurst have been among the first to rebuild after the hurricanes. But when you're one of the first ones back after the storm, life can indeed be lonely.
I've been in the shrimping business since I was 15 years old, so it's 33 years. Fishermen have been traced in my family back to the 17th century, all the way through up until the present day.
Ray Brandhurst is one of the more than 7,000 fishermen who earned their living hauling shrimp from Louisiana's waters before Katrina hit. It's a grueling way of life, even in the best of times.
Hard work, very hard work. Face the elements on a daily basis, whether it's the winds blowing, it's rough conditions, storms, you know. A lot of physical work involved.
Yes, ma'am. 5 pounds, please. Absolutely. The big ones, right? The big ones.
Kay Brandhurst has been Ray's wife and business partner for more than 2 decades now. Down here, shrimping is a family operation, and everybody has a job to do.
My role is to try to get rid of it and get rid of it at a decent price so that we're able to make a living. Thank you, sweetie. Bye-bye. For 22 years in St. Bernard Parish, we had a retail wholesale seafood outlet where I did move a lot of Ray's catch through there. It wasn't an easy life, but it was a good life.
That good life came crashing down on August 28, 2005.
Hurricane Katrina is bearing down on New Orleans.
The top wind gusts measured at 155 miles per hour.
Weather experts fear the storm's surge from Katrina could swamp the city, which is below sea level.
Hurricanes are a fact of life on the Louisiana coast, but as the Brandhursts and their 4 children raced out of town ahead of Katrina, Ray, who'd spent a lifetime on the water here, knew that this storm was going to be different.
I said, Kay, look to the right. The marshes and all were already completely underwater already. This was like 2:30 in the day on Sunday. I said, Kay, we're in trouble. I said, this storm's pushing way too much water ahead of it. I said, we're in trouble, babe.
It wasn't just the Brandhursts that were in trouble. The storm was roaring towards the very heart of Louisiana's shrimping industry, an industry vitally important to the region's economy. In Louisiana, shrimp had been a billion-dollar-a-year business, although people here were already feeling the pressure from cheap foreign imports. More than 3/4 of the shrimp Americans consume now comes from overseas. But Katrina was a blow no one ever imagined. The very same waters that had provided a decent living for generations now suddenly took it all away in a matter of hours. Shrimpers returned to find not just their homes, or even worse, their boats destroyed, but their entire industry had been swept out from under them.
We were instantly thrust into like almost a third world environment. We had no electricity, we had no water, You had no store to even get the simplest of things. There was nothing.
We had absolutely nothing, but we had to somehow try to get our lives back together. I mean, we have 4 children.
Though they eventually found a place to live, Ray knew that the only way to keep a roof over their heads was to have a boat under his feet.
I told myself, I said, if the boat was still there and okay, that I can begin immediately working, you know,
To try to rebuild our lives.
to rebuild our lives. And unfortunately, when I got here, it was too late. It wasn't. It was sunk. So
We went to Plan B.
That meant trying to repair their shattered boat, even though the most basic equipment was nearly impossible to find.
everything had to be flushed out, pumped out, changing numerous parts on the motors.
And as we got started in that, Rita came along and reflooded us.
After 6 weeks of backbreaking work, Ray's boat was seaworthy enough to go back on the water. And the hurricanes even brought an unexpected benefit, as if trying to make up for all the trouble they'd caused. Rather than hurting the shrimp beds, the storms had actually bathed them in nutrients. The Gulf Coast teemed with record numbers of shrimp now, and there were only a handful of shrimpers to compete for them. Ray was bringing literally tons of shrimp back to the dock, ready to be sold. But there was one more thing the storm had taken from them: customers.
Before the storm, we were able to market a lot of product because we had, over the years, had built up a customer base.
A local customer base.
A local customer base. We had local customers here in St. Bernard Parish, and we also drew off of New Orleans East and the Ninth Ward, which all of those areas also were equally as devastated as St. Bernard Parish. So all of those customer bases are gone. We have no more.
So it's like being 44 years old and you're reinventing yourself.
Richard McCarthy is helping them do just that. A Loyola University economist and founder of New Orleans' Crescent City Farmers Market, McCarthy has been working hand in hand with people like the Brandhursts to try to reinvent the industry. In the long run, he believes, Hurricane Katrina might actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise for Louisiana's shrimpers.
Before the storm, the seafood industry was suffering, but it was just melting away very slowly. The drama of the storm violently pulled away the veneer, demonstrated what was happening. How do we rebuild, or do we rebuild? And the question we've been asking together with the fishermen is, maybe it's not rebuild, but retool. Is there an opportunity to create something of a boutique fishing industry?
We have a unique set of conditions here in Louisiana where we have an influx of fresh water into the salt water and makes it a certain condition where the shrimp have a very flavorful taste. You know, we call it sweet water here, you know.
Seafood so delectable and so perishable seldom makes it very far from the dock. But with local consumers scattered far and wide by the storm, McCarthy believed he could solve the Brandhurst problem by letting the rest of the country in on the secret, by making the humble Gulf shrimp an object of desire for gourmets everywhere.
We all recognized that we needed to open up new markets for this product. So a group of chefs in New York said, come on up, let's learn what you have to offer, let's see if together we can add value to menus and direct consumers' attention to how people in the Gulf Coast are heroically trying to rebuild their lives.
So, armed with a video camera, McCarthy, the Brandhursts, and a handful of others appointed themselves ambassadors for the bayou. Calling themselves the White Boot Brigade, after the shrimpers' trademark footwear, they piled into a limousine paid for by a nonprofit group, filled it up with freshly harvested shrimp, and headed for Broadway.
This was, you know, the Shrimpers Take Manhattan. We had contacted the Carlton Hotel to see if we could stay there. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of shrimp. So we paid for our rooms with boxes of fresh shrimp.
Did you eat here tonight?
Yeah, we did.
Did you have any shrimp?
Yes, it was delicious.
They caught it.
It was great. You caught the shrimp.
Thank you.
I'd say that we were all amazed at the reception that we got, the fact that people were interested in our lives.
But the shrimpers hadn't come all this way to meet ordinary New Yorkers. Having lost most of their loyal customers back home, they'd come here to meet with some of the city's top chefs. and see if Louisiana shrimp could satisfy some of the most demanding customers in the world.
I try to have the best ingredients. When you see the good shrimp, they are different.
Cesare Casello is a Tuscan-born Michelin star-winning chef who teaches at the prestigious French Culinary Institute. His popular restaurant, Maremma, was one of the many visited by the White Boot Brigade.
You want like all fish, but shrimp especially, you want to see you the smile, because you see the color, the shrimp, you see the bright color, they are so nice.
Richard McCarthy hoped that Chef Casella would be impressed by the quality of Louisiana shrimp. He was not disappointed.
The chef just, he sort of threw himself onto the shrimp. He said, I know shrimp like this. I've had this back in Sicily.
They taste very similar to the shrimp they have in Italy. They are tender and they are soft, but they are sweet.
Well, he just starts throwing salt and sea salt and olive oil, and he just starts gobbling them up raw because he just never had tasted such fresh shrimp. He reminded me of my little boy.
At least once a week now, the Brandhursts send more than 20 pounds of shrimp on a 1,000-mile journey to Chef Casella's kitchen. But it needs to arrive as fresh as if it had just come off the boat. A difficult trick, and something none of the shrimpers have much experience with. There have been problems with the packaging, and while the product is cheap, shipping is expensive. It ate up as much as 80% of the price before FedEx gave them a discount. The chefs in New York are sympathetic, but they're also businessmen, so shrimpers like the Brandhursts are under a lot of pressure to get it right.
The chefs, provided a great deal of tough love to our shrimpers, and we did several trial runs of shipping the product up directly to the chefs. And the first few runs didn't go that well. But the chefs, I think because of what they'd gone through in 9/11, recognized that, there's no one else here to help.
That includes the American taxpayers. Despite promises from Washington, rebuilding money has been slow in coming. And for shrimpers like the Brandhursts, at least, what they need may never arrive. After assessing the damage from the storm, the Louisiana fishing industry asked for more than $1 billion in federal disaster assistance. What they got was less than 5% of that.
I think we've been forgotten a long time ago, even before the storm, and even more so now, because it's been really devastated.
The future's a little uncertain, but I truly believe that this is that somehow we're gonna get this business back off the ground. It's gonna be a little different, but it's gonna work.
Coming up next, life in a FEMA trailer. Looking around the Gulf Coast region, the image that dominates the landscape is this: the FEMA trailer. You see them nestled in fancy neighborhoods, alone backed up against ruined houses, and sometimes in hastily arranged clusters. And despite the label, the Weekender, this has been home for months to over 100,000 people affected by the hurricanes.
I have 3 children, myself and my husband, and we live in a 1-bedroom camper trailer.
For Raquel Hines' family of 5, life in a trailer is challenging, especially in the mornings.
Oh, the mornings are nothing nice. Normally, my husband gets up first, and by 6 o'clock, he's out the door. Then about 6:30, my girls get up. They take turns, they share the bathroom, they have breakfast together, and then during this time, my baby and I are still in the bed. When the girls leave out the door, they'll say, okay, we're finished, and they leave. When they leave, we get up. And me and him run around for about an hour till time to go to school. It's hard because you have to really do everything in shifts.
Despite the morning chaos, though, Raquel feels blessed to live amongst her co-workers in a site provided by her employer,
the school system, where she is a secretary.
Everybody's kind of together, and we work together as a team. We're like a big family at work. We do what we need to do to help the next person.
Living near coworkers and seeing your trailer out your office window isn't an option for everyone. About an hour away from New Orleans is this, a FEMA-run site called Diamond. It's one of the 134 FEMA-run trailer parks around the region. 450 trailers are on this site alone, and its residents come from all of the little towns that make up the county, creating a sort of instant community of strangers. I spent an autumn day here recently to get a sense of just what life is like. Anitra Milne has lived here with her husband Thomas and their 4 kids for the past 9 months after their home was utterly destroyed by Katrina.
You have 4 kids.
Yes, sir.
Not all of you live in this trailer.
Yes, sir. We all stay in here. We have 2. FEMA did give us 2 trailers. The thing of it is, 3 of us are supposed to stay here, and 3 of us are supposed to stay in the one behind us. But we're a family. We don't want to do that. We all stay together.
Well, I can understand that. Is it possible to run what we might call at home a dog run between the 2 trailers and hook them up?
No, I don't think so. I wish there was.
Well, you know, I mean this in no disrespectful way, but that's what I'd call a close family.
It's pretty close.
Yeah.
It's pretty close.
Anitra invited me inside to show me what it's like for a family of 6 to live in a 288 square foot trailer.
And I tell you, these walls, it seems like they get littler and littler every day, or smaller, closer in, just, it's a mess.
Well, you know, when you talk about what it's like inside the trailer, it's pretty hard to imagine what it's actually like for a family of 6, as you
right.
You know?
There's no family eating dinner anymore. I mean, we used to sit around our table at home and have a family dinner, but it's not like that anymore.
Have you or the children run across any stigma from other people on the outside because you're here in this special group environment of trailers?
Not really. I mean, everybody is in the same shoes right now. Everybody's in the same predicament. Everybody you talk to, oh, I'm in a FEMA trailer right now.
And although those who live here don't pay for the privilege, life is certainly no easy street.
Every other person in these trailer parks made criteria for depression.
Dr. Lynn Laurie surveyed life in trailer parks for the International Medical Corps, a nonprofit organization that responds to disasters around the world. And she says depression levels here are no different than what you find after any crisis that forces people to flee their homes, equal to any third world catastrophe.
The depression rates that we found were similar to the depression rates that we found in Afghanistan, similar to the rates that we found in Darfur, similar to the rates that we found in Iraq, and similar to many of the other countries that have been studied. But it's not country to country. It's the fact that they are in temporary housing. These are travel trailers. These are not livable trailers. They can comfortably hold 1, maybe 2 people, but not for the long term.
Well, what's the best thing about it? Or is there any best about it?
We got a roof over our head. That's the best thing.
And what's the worst of it?
It's not on.
That's all right. Here, I'll put this in your hand. Yeah. Okay. One never knows exactly what to say in this kind of situation, but I really regret you have to go through this and be in this situation. But I also respect the fact that somehow, some way you've been able to make it.
That's right. I mean, we're all together, and that's what counts. I mean, family is number 1.
And her family's safety is a daily worry for this mother of 4 young children, for good reason.
We had a shooting right here on this lane about a month ago.
You had a shooting here?
Yes, sir. I mean, there's things going on you see at night, but you'll see cars, they'll come park at somebody's trailer. 2 minutes, they're leaving. A couple minutes later, another one's coming up. I mean, you pretty much know what's going on.
What's going on?
It's drug deals.
Wally Armstead, a FEMA spokesperson, didn't dispute that there are security problems at places like Diamond.
There's a lot of children in here.
Right.
And people living this close together with this many people in a fenced-in environment, granted, but how safe are they?
Well, that's one of the reasons why we have security at the gate and actually roaming security also.
That security force is responsible for maintaining order at the site
watching who comes and goes, patrolling between trailers. But the guards have no power to arrest and must rely on local authorities for help.
I'm a reporter, and you didn't just waddle off the turnip truck or something yourself. I mean, we're not naive. You take this many people, including children, you're bound to have some crime.
Oh, you're going to have challenges. You're going to have challenges because, unfortunately, our society is made up of a mix of people, and not all of them are honorable.
Well, have you had thievery in here?
There's always been minor reports of incidences of arguments of folks not getting along. The actual reports on theft, I don't have that.
Drug dealing?
I don't have that report with me either.
We were able last night to make a narcotics arrest in here.
The local sheriff, Jeff Hinkle, also knows security is an issue, especially drug crimes. At a community meeting held in a hurricane-damaged shell of a building, he addressed the challenges his officers face dealing with this newly created town.
We were being challenged just to get into the park. You know, they were letting other people in, but they were stopping the police and holding us up, which I really believe in my heart was a way of them covering for what was going on in the community.
In fact, just days before we filmed, the security at Diamond was changed and a new staff of people was brought in after almost 9 months of problems and complaints. Now, the sheriff has an easier time getting on and off the site. The day we were there, his office was holding a Halloween party for the children of Diamond.
There you go, yeah!
But too often, kids have fallen through the cracks.
Children were hit twice by Katrina, once by the storm and then by a response system that really didn't work for them.
Hi, I'm Barbara with Save the Children.
Barbara Amorati represents Save the Children, a group that provides emergency services to kids after disasters worldwide. This is its largest emergency response ever in the United States.
Save the Children typically responds internationally. That has been the way our organization has worked. When Katrina hit, it was an unprecedented disaster with unprecedented chaos, and there was no way that we felt that we could stand back. Hey guys, how's it going?
But Save the Children's job has been an uphill struggle.
Unfortunately, a year later, in the temporary housing sites, there are not a lot of services for kids. There are some parks that have gotten more attention than others, but this park has a population of at least 300 or 400 school-age children, and there were no structured activities for children.
That's changing now at Diamond. A former Harlem Globetrotter is starting a basketball program. Other groups are coming in on weekends to play organized games with the kids. And there's even movie night, but it took months for this to happen.
There are professional groups, nonprofits, that specialize in coming into these situations and helping children. It's my understanding that the main group was slow to get in here. Why was that?
Well, there's a process of making sure that they understand the privacy information, the Privacy Act, and also understand that what we can do and what we can't do under the guidance of the Stafford Act.
The Stafford Act governs how FEMA responds in disaster situations. After any disaster, FEMA must follow certain protocol before even the most charitable group can be let in. And so what looked like bureaucratic red tape to people waiting for service was exactly that, red tape.
FEMA can't go beyond that unless Congress or someone mandates and forces a change within that Stafford Act or amendment to that Stafford Act. So we operate within the form of the
legislation.
Thank you.
But eventually they did get in.
Right, we did.
That explanation still doesn't dampen the frustration felt by people within the park, especially when it comes to the prospect of getting out of Diamond. Around the Gulf, people are outraged to learn that the U.S. government pays on average $40,000 per trailer at sites like this to house a family, quote, temporarily.
Why not give people $30,000, $40,000 a piece? Say go buy your piece of land and a trailer and live on your own.
We're mandated only to set up the temporary housing. So we can't take that money and say, well, we'll just give this directly to the individual.
So let me make sure I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
Your counterpoint is it's not that simple.
Well, no, and especially depending on the disaster.
With the housing inventory all but wiped off the map in the little towns where the residents of this trailer park once lived, it may be some time before folks will even be able to think about leaving here, far beyond the original
February 2007 deadline.
The understanding was that these parks would be in existence for 18 months. Certainly these parks are not going to shut the doors and lock down in 18 months. That's not going to happen.
So for now, people like Anitra and her family may have to spend another holiday here. But they hope to be in a new mobile home soon and move away from this gravel-covered community of strangers.
Well, how are you going to get in this mobile home?
Out of our pocket. We're using everything that we have saved up to get the mobile home.
Financially, are you able to make ends meet?
Yeah, as of right now, we're not gonna have any furniture, but we're gonna have a roof over our head, a bigger roof.
You seem to have a good spirit about it.
Oh, yes, sir. You gotta have.
Down here, there are hundreds of thousands of people, like the ones we've introduced you to tonight. Everyone's story is different, each one is unique, and these stories will continue to be written long after the cameras have moved on. Some will end in failure, others will find success, but every one of them will have an effect on this region and our country for years to come. Why do they stay here, trying to rebuild against such long odds? Because they say, this is home. And because disaster can strike just about anywhere. That's probably the most important thing the survivors of Katrina and Rita would like you to know, that it could happen to you. Their story could just as easily be yours someday. So you may want to pay attention to how this one ends. Dan Rather reporting, tonight from Louisiana. Good night.
Louisiana, Louisiana, they're trying to wash us away. They're trying to wash us away. Louisiana, Louisiana, they're trying to wash us away. They're trying to wash us away.